So, hello everyone. Today we have Marc Pelath, the Laconic, and we're going to jump right in. And so, if you can introduce yourself, what makes you a musician, a composer, and you.
Okay. Yeah, my name's Marc Pelath. I am a composer primarily, I would say at this point. A multi-instrumentalist, although not really great at any one instrument, but probably the touch guitar is my main instrument, followed by synths. The name, my sort of musical name, or really the name of the project that I run, I now think of it as a project, is the Laconic. My first album came out in, I guess, 2 years ago now. I've released 3 albums at this point and working on a 4th. And that's the short of it. So we can get into details as we go along here.
Sure. So you mentioned synth and touch guitar. So touch guitar, when did that? I see a lot of instruments behind you, guitars and basses. So I'm assuming that's kind of where you started, and then got into the touch guitar. So how did that happen? When did that happen? How do you feel about the instrument?
Yeah, that's been a long process. So I guess I could start back at the beginning and go into how I arrived at it. So, as a child and a young teenager, I studied piano with a local piano teacher. And I've been thinking about this a lot lately, but everything that I learned at that age really has still stuck with me. It's really provided the musical foundation that I still leverage today. So that was really important, but I kind of gave up piano. The piano teacher moved away and I didn't really stick with it. Though I still like to play things. I think I bought a Micro Moog when I was a teenager. I played that for a while. I had no idea how to use it. But I did things with it. I made sounds. And my brother was a guitarist, so I didn't want to be a guitarist because we already had one that was had a several year head start on me. So I loved, it was and am still a big Yes fan. So I loved Chris Squire, and he made me want to become a bassist. So the bass became my instrument. And I was, was sort of a bedroom player for years. I could never find a drummer, for one thing. That's probably why I never got into a band in any serious way. And then, of course, as many do, I, came to start listening to King Crimson, and, I kind of knew about the Chapman Stick through Tony Levin and maybe a few other.
When did you start? When did you first hear King Crimson?
I think probably when I was a junior or senior in high school. I used to go to the library a lot after school, and I would listen to whatever they had that was kind of proggy. And I think there was a King Crimson box set, and I checked that out and sort of devoured it.
Was that the thrack era or the 80s?
80s. Yeah, really.
80s?
It was pre-thrack. Yeah, when I got into Crimson, and so I was really into the Discipline era stuff, and that's still my favorite. Discipline and Beat, especially.
Yeah, it's funny. That's kind of how my mom got me one of those Crimson for young people kind of thing, and she had no idea what it was, and it was the 1969 album, and then the 80s era.
Yeah, actually, I think that was the first CD I got. The Young Person's Guide.
Yeah.
So that worked out well.
Yeah. Oh, that's cool. And it's funny, the drummer thing, because that's kind of why I pushed my brother to play drums, because I had studied guitar, and he was always interested in maybe saxophone, and I'm like, yeah, drums will be cool. And he agrees with me now, of course, but
yeah. I'd hope my younger brother would pick up drums. Yeah, same.
There you
go. He didn't get into music the same way me and my older brother did. So
So there's three of you in the family?
Yeah,
Three
yeah,
sons?
I'm the middle one, yeah.
Middle one, yeah.
We have my older brother, yeah, he's a guitarist, and he played on my last album, which we'll talk about, and he plays a bit on the new one as well.
Okay. And so yeah, the touch guitar, how did that kind of, I mean, you mentioned the Chapman stick was
Chapman stick. So I bought a Chapman stick. I'm not sure exactly what year, because I'm terrible with things like that. But it was sometime in my sort of mid-20s, I got a Chapman stick. Tried to learn to play it by reading the book, Emmett Chapman's book. I could do a few things. I went to a few stick seminars, tried to get into it. Seriously, I started with one of the old polycarbonate sticks, and then I bought a new one, which was a graphite stick, which is fairly new at the time, that was pretty cool. But I never really got anywhere with it. I tried to dedicate myself to it, but I didn't have a teacher nearby, and it's touch guitars, you have to be pretty special to really learn it on your own.
Yeah.
Marcus Ritter did, Trey Gunn did, Tony Levin did. I guess others have had some success, but
yeah, they all came from a different angle to it.
Anywhere with it by my own. So of course, I then bought a war guitar, thinking that would make it better. And then I got a Trey Gunn signature series. I thought Trey Gunn was just amazing. You still do, of course.
Yeah. Those are heavy. That was one of the reasons I didn't get a war guitarist. They were too heavy for me.
They are heavy. Yeah, and that's the reason that so I had the war guitar when I started lessons with Marcus Reuter.
Okay.
Back in I don't know, I guess that was about 5 years ago now, something like that. And yeah, soon after that I bought the U8, which is the one that I played today, and then I finally have a second U8 that's on its way from Germany right now.
Right.
Yeah.
And you're also part of the Touch Guitar Circle family.
Yeah.
I think you just finished one of the seminars that was in Pennsylvania, and you also hosted one at your place during kind of the endish of the pandemic. How did you get involved with all of that? Of course, you were connected with Marcus with taking lessons with him. But how does that kind of change your network and things like that?
Yeah, because of the pandemic, there was sort of this gap, of course, in the meetings. And then Marcus he said he was coming over. I forget why. It must have been for a tour, but I don't remember the details. He said, if someone wants to set up a Touch Guitar Circle meeting, I can come do that. And I just thought, already the Touch Guitar Circle had given so much to me. I felt like maybe I should give something back. And I also thought, if I have it in my house and I don't have to travel, I just stay at my house. When I'm done, I can go upstairs and sleep in my own bed. And, so there was kind of sort of a selfish component to it as well. So that's why I did it. And I mean, the way I did it was kind of different from the way it had been done in the past and the way that it's gone back to being done now. It was sort of more loose. Everyone was sort of responsible for getting their own accommodation. I tried to help with that, but we had all the sessions here during the day and during the evening, and it worked out pretty well. And some people, everyone gets really charged up after those things.
Yeah, absolutely.
So that well.
And the last one in Pennsylvania, that was just like a couple of weeks ago, right? It was pretty long, from what I heard, and pretty well attended.
Yeah, it was really well attended. I think there were 10 or 12 people. I didn't go for the whole thing. I went for
Okay.
the first 3 days, but that was great in itself. Yeah, the way that Marcus's sort of pedagogy has evolved, I can already tell between that session and the one I had at my house, we sort of covered more in 3 days than we had covered in 5, just like a year
Yeah.
before that. So it's really getting to be more efficient. It's great stuff, and I came away from it with a lot of things to practice.
Yeah, I mean, Marcus also does the at a distance circles, I guess, and I mean, it's very different from I started doing that when they took place in Seattle, and Trigon was part of it. Um, Obviously, I was completely new to the instrument, so I didn't even have a touch guitar yet. Marcus was gracious enough to, at the end of the first one, to be like, "Hey, you know what? Keep it. This one is staying in
Oh, nice.
North America, so just keep it. Take it home. Make sure you don't break it." And then someone bought it, and but that helped me, get started. So, but to go back to you, obviously, because this is about you. You've done quite a lot in the last 3-4 years.
Yeah.
So, what kind of finally clicked, I guess, for you to be making music and to be writing? Because you're writing everything, and you're writing not just the guitar parts or the touch guitar parts, you're writing a lot of the other um, instrumentations.
Yeah. So I think what happened was, I had this war guitar sitting in the corner of my room for several years, and it wasn't getting used most of the time. And also, I was in my late 40s. I'm 50 now. I was in my mid 40s or something, and I thought, if I don't take this seriously now, like when's it ever gonna happen?
Right.
So I don't know why, and maybe it was finding this triggered those thoughts, but I discovered somehow that Marcus Reuter, who I'd heard of, like I knew he was a touch guitar player. I didn't really know his music at that point. I forget what else I knew about him. Maybe I probably had some of his materials from the old like Touch Style Quarterly that used to get published.
Yeah.
Yeah, I got my hands on a few copies of that. I think, well, Frank Jolliffe ran that, I think. I managed
I
to
only I
get
only
some of that
got
while he was
those.
still alive.
Yeah, I only got those because I think Marcus shared them as PDFs at some point.
Yeah.
But I had no idea those even existed. So yeah.
Yeah, it's pretty, there's some good stuff in there if you can ever find copies of that. But yeah, so basically I started taking lessons with Marcus. I was just learning to play touch guitar, and I think maybe about 2 years into that, I started. I don't know why I got my hands on Ableton Live. I actually started with Logic. That's what happened. I started with Logic.
Hmm.
I'm like, all right, I'll just record something for fun. So I started learning basics of just recording and using a digital audio workstation. And pretty soon after that, I'm like, well, if I want to learn how to do this, I'm going to use what Marcus uses. So I got Ableton Live
Okay.
and had like a lesson with him. Instead of doing touch guitar, we just went over basics of using Ableton Live. And then I think the next thing I started doing was recording a cover of Veteran of the Psychic Wars by Blue Oyster Cult. I don't remember why I picked that one. I just thought it was cool. I guess I was listening to it and I thought, I think I could replicate this
Yeah.
in Ableton. And that was sort of the first thing I really recorded and tried to do. I think I learned a ton doing that. And I think you can actually, I think You might still be able to listen to that on my Bandcamp. I put it up there.
Yeah, I
And
think you
it's
have
not a
the
bad cover.
derivatives collections or something. Yeah.
Yeah, derivatives.
Yeah.
So, and from there, I think I did my first composition, which was which song DBS, which is sort of a Porcupine Tree-ish, early Pink Floyd-ish, and I think there was some other influence in there. There's a bit of a crimson-y, like interlocking pattern kind of stuff in there. And that was like the first song that I wrote, and that shows up on my first album. It's pretty good. It's a pretty good tune. I still like listening to it once in a while. And from there, I told Marcus, I said, I think I want to record an album. And he said, well, you need a plan. So I came up with this, and maybe he even mentioned this, and I thought, okay, I'll just go with that. But the idea was that I was gonna record an album like over the next 6 to 9 months. I was gonna try to write a song a month until I had enough. And because I was gonna try to write a song a month, I thought, well, I'll tie the song to that month in some way.
Okay.
So I used it to sort of inspire, like mainly the choice of time signature is related to like what number the month of the year is. So like
That's cool.
the first song, Anthem, I wrote it in July. July is the 7th month. It's in 7/4, but it also has like stuff related to July in it, which is why it's called Anthem.
Okay. Oh wow, that's interesting stuff. I didn't know about that album, background stuff. I always like that stuff. That's why I like having the little booklets from CDs, and especially the reissues where they kind of explains it a little bit more. And I'm a little geeky like that.
Oh yeah, me too. Love all that stuff. Love finding little nuggets, like learning someone played on an album that you hadn't realized before. You learn to draw connections between all these things. I always thought that was cool from back when I was a teenager. I would do stuff like that.
Yeah, absolutely. So you have okay, so that was kind of the seeds, and like I said, you've done quite a bit over the last 3-4 years, and we'll go a little bit more into details with that. But so you've kind of touched upon some of your influences. Can you do a top three, or it can be 4 or 5. We're not going to be like no 3.
Yeah, I mean, I thought about this a lot over the last few years, and some of it you kind of discover. You can't really know who your influences are unless you make something that has been influenced. So, I mean, Chris Squire I already mentioned.
So yes, yeah.
Yeah, yes, and probably the number one influence though is Tony Banks. And I think probably now, in retrospect, I think Genesis is probably my favorite band of all time, and Tony Banks is a big reason for that. I just think he's just an amazing keyboardist and also an amazing songwriter and just an amazing all-around musician.
You don't have a preference with the 70s Genesis or the 80s Genesis?
No, I love
the whole thing,
all
right?
of it, really.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I love them in different ways. Like early 70s, Peter Gabriel era, I love. Probably my favorite era is sort of the middle era with Phil Collins and Steve Hackett when they were like 4. And then, but probably my favorite album, I think we've talked about this before, my favorite album would be Duke.
Oh yeah.
That's kind of like the Duke and 90125 by Yes probably define like the sound that I want to have.
All right, so you've got some 80s pop.
Yeah,
influences.
That's another thing. Like I love the intersection of like progressive rock and pop rock. which those kind of eras from those bands really exemplify. But also, you know, bands like Tears for Fears, who you
Yeah.
are sort of pop rock, but I think in more recent years they've been reevaluated as kind of falling under the edge of the prog umbrella in some ways. um, so yeah, so those are influences. Also, um, Donald Fagen. Actually, I'm a huge Steely Dan fan, and
Okay.
it's not so much an influence directly musically because I'm not doing that kind of music, although I love that music to death. Like the way he operates in the context of that band, like you know, him and Walter Becker were that band, but of course they didn't play everything themselves or even most things themselves. They had musicians that they worked with regularly or that they brought in to do specific things. And that's kind of how the Laconic works as well. So I kind of model myself after Donald Fagen in those ways. And then, I mean, as a fourth, I mean, Mike Oldfield, which is kind of a strange case because I was I was almost, you know, I knew he existed, but I didn't listen to anything of his until really a couple of years ago. So,
Hmm.
I mean, at least at first, he couldn't have been an influence because I didn't know what he did.
Right.
But I've just been like devouring his discography, which is huge. And, you know, I learn a lot from it actually. And he's just really an amazing composer. Um,
Yes. And unfortunately, a little bit, unfortunately, I think most people only know him for Tubular Bells, which is great, but there's so much more to him. And
yeah, I
of
mean,
course,
it's his
he
first
writes.
album. He did a few
Yeah,
things after
ex-
that
exactly. He's
and
done a
got
few things
better
after
at it.
that. Yeah. And he composes everything. I mean, I don't know. I know the first one again. He kind of almost played pretty much all the instruments, but after
Yeah.
that, of course, he's uh, working with other musicians and things like that. So yeah, so you've got a
Yeah.
really good, a big spectrum of different influences. Um, as you mentioned, you can tell the influence once you actually write something that seems like it's influenced by that. So, what's your approach in writing? I don't know if you have a particular one, if you use a particular instrument, or if you it kind of depends, or what do
It
you
depends. I
usually?
mean, I do a combination of things, unsurprisingly. Some songs will start with usually something I improvise on touch guitar.
Mhm.
That would be maybe just a lick or a little melody or a pattern that I think sounds cool. That could be the seed of something. I also will improvise on keyboard. So I'll sit at this piano here and pick out chord progressions and use that as a seed. And I think the third way is kind of a theoretical approach, which comes in sometimes where I'll do some music theoretic exercise or explorations that will result in something that is really interesting and that can be the seed of a piece too. So that's where things sort of start. And then I kind of go through these manic phases of just adding to it, seeing what works, expanding things, picking out melodies from a chord progression or coming up with a chord progression that fits a melody. Um, and it just kind of spirals out of control. And I think, you know, it's really hard it's almost impossible to describe the way that you actually came up with the song. And I think Brian Eno has talked about this in some interviews and he really hit it like dead on. Like at the time you're just doing like, let's try this. This sounds cool. And
Yeah.
just the accumulation of that is what you end up with. And you can kind of go back and try to rationalize things after the fact, but that's really not the way it worked at the time.
Yeah. I try to. I always fail, but I try to keep a log potential possibly of
Oh
how I
yeah.
came up with stuff.
That would be interesting.
Like I say, I always fail because it's like, oh, I need to do this, and then it's like I forgot.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
but I like to try to do this, and and like you said, I mean, sometimes I'll go back to something a couple years later and try to explain it, and it's rationalized. Yeah, is it what happened at the time? I can't be sure about that for sure.
Yeah, right. Exactly.
Yeah. Um, so you've mentioned we're kind of finishing up on the last few questions on the general stuff, and then we'll go
Sure.
into the album stuff. You've mentioned that obviously you haven't really played in bands. You've started when you were a kid and a teenager playing bass, and then
Mhm.
are you planning? Would you love to play some of that music live? And what's kind of the next step for you?
Yeah, I think I think playing live is, there's some issues with that. I mean, I'm not that confident as an instrumentalist. I mean, that's my fault. I need to practice more. But also I'm kind of twitchy too, and I never know when that's gonna be a concern when I'm playing. There's also, I mean, the Laconic is, I mean, the people that are in the project are all over the place.
Right.
Uh, you know, they're in Spain, and they're in Denmark, and they're in Austria, and they're in England, and they're in different places in the United States, like Tim's in Maine. So like actually getting the people needed to play it would be a big ordeal. I mean, you have to find a different group of people largely.
Yeah, locally maybe.
Yeah. But then, yeah, I mean, there's so many I don't know. It's just, I had no plans to play live.
No plans to play live. All right, no, that's fine.
Lots of reasons.
It's I know the feeling. It's hard. I haven't really played live in quite a few years, just because of personal life and like you said, finding musicians and the time,
Yeah.
et cetera, et cetera. It's not as easy as people would think. It's like, oh, you're a musician, you just start playing with people. It's like, yeah, you know.
Maybe if you're a full-time musician,
Yeah,
yeah,
if
it's harder when you're
and
trying
and
to
even that, I
do a
think
job as well.
for full-time musicians, it might be a little difficult to sometimes find, you have to find the right people in a sense.
Yeah.
And geography is important. If everybody's local, it's much easier than if you're split up in different countries or even different state for the United States. So
Yeah. I mean, if you're a three-piece like Stickmen, you can make that kind of thing work. I mean, they're all over the place, but
yeah, and
you're like
they're
an
super pros.
eight-piece, like, or I mean, there's even more people on the new album I'm working on, so it becomes increasingly difficult to assemble everyone that's needed.
Get Rick Wakeman and he'll play all the flute and oboe parts on the keyboard, right?
Yeah, yeah. There'd be a lot of arrangement that would have to be done. It would be a big job.
Yeah. Okay, so we're gonna talk about the more specifically about the albums. But the first question I wanted to ask is, what's with the trees on the artwork? Because I think all of you have a tree.
Yeah, that's a good question. So, I'm trying to think how it started. So I needed an album cover for the first album, Integrals, and it occurred to me to go to my cousin August Hare, who's an artist and a musician. And we, talked about what I wanted the concept to be, or stylistically what I wanted it to look like. And I just know that because I'd started to put together some sort of like photography and artwork for the interior of the CD, like to go with the liner notes and so forth. And I really like this color contrast of blue against orange. I've always liked that contrast, and in particular in nature, you get that kind of this awesome gradation from like blue to orange. It's sunset sometimes. It's like it's like my favorite color gradient in the world. So I said, you know, I kind of like this idea of having these two opposite things, blue and orange, but they kind of integrate together in this way. I think at that point I'd already decided on the name of the album, which is Integrals. So I wanted something involving blue and orange and something that involved things that are opposite, but being harmonious. So he's like, so he thought he would go look through his picture of like photographic material that he'd use for pieces, and he found a picture like of this barren tree. I think it was in Georgia or Atlanta in the winter, at night in a parking lot of like some new development, and it was just kind of this really stark image, but it had bits, it had blues and oranges in it for some reason, and I like the idea of there's a moon over it, so you have the moon and the earth, and you have like this tree, but you also have this chain link fence and this parking lot, and you have these blues and oranges. So that's why the first album cover was a tree, and then I was kind of thinking ahead. I don't remember why I did this even, but I said, you know, there's this photo that my father took years ago of this tree covered in ice, which I think was at my grandparents' house in the country, and that's beautiful too. You know, this tree covered in ice with this bright blue sky behind it, and I said, "Can you do this as well? Do a painting." So, and that became the album cover for the second album, Marc Pelath. And then I'm like, at that point, you know, there was a pattern established, and I like the idea of having some consistency and some kind of theme because because it's part of branding. So I thought I would just keep going with that. And there's one exception. So for some of the EPs, I put together artwork that was trees again in different ways. But the third album, which came out recently, which is Time and Tide, that doesn't have a tree, but it does have kind of but that album's a bit different anyway, so it kind of doesn't count.
It does have a kind of a towering thing though, still.
Yeah, and the tower is sort of tree-like.
Yeah.
And the next album will also be a tree-based album cover as well.
All right.
So that's already in process.
Yeah, that's already in process. Yeah. So right now you've got I say a couple things going. You have the solo albums, and then you have the collaboration with Kid Arrow. So the first thing is, why do you use the Laconic rather than your own name, Marc Pelath? Is there a particular?
Easier to pronounce, I think.
Yeah, fair.
But I kind of
we had that conversation, so yes.
Yeah. I kind of wanted to have some anonymity to hide behind if I needed to. But more recently, I kind of appreciate the ability to be able to distinguish myself as a private person from this public-facing entity. And also, I mean, the Laconic, it started out as just me, but I think it was a good decision because it encompasses so many other people involved. So I just don't really want to tie it to my name particularly. But I think pronouncing is probably the main thing.
The main thing, yeah.
Yeah, really, practically. I think that's what it comes down to.
That's a fair reason. Maybe I should do the same because I know my last name is not easy to pronounce.
Yeah, you have the same problem. Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, it's a little too late for me because I've been doing stuff.
You've done a few already.
But yeah. And so you, I mean, I'm very curious on how you approach your albums because you went from the first one to the second one very quickly, and you're actually going into I know we had a conversation maybe, I don't think a year ago, or maybe 6-9 months ago, and you were like, yeah, I'll do a third one, but I'll take some time. And then, well, it seems like you kind of didn't and just started right into it, and doing other stuff at the same time. So you know, do they flow into each other? Is it, or they're their own beasts in their set themselves? Obviously, there's a overarching sound that's uniquely
Yeah.
yours.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Well, I've done them so I mean, if we put, I was gonna say if we put aside Time and Tide, but maybe we don't even have to. I mean, the if we count as the three integrals, Amor Fati, and the new one, which is called Meditations, they I started writing before the previous one had been completed. Actually, with Amor Fati, I mean, when we were mixing Amor Fati in Italy, I was already writing for Meditations while we were mixing. Like we would mix all day, and then I'd go back to my room at night and compose. Like I was really, when I get in that creative phase, I just have to write it out.
Yeah.
And the sort of last 2 years have been like that. Same with integrals and Amor Fati. Like I think I started writing. Yeah, I definitely started writing Amor Fati before integrals was released. It might have been mixed at that point, but
That's how you
there's
know.
definitely an overlap between all of them.
Yeah, but that's how you know one song is going to go in the next one, because obviously you're already in the kind of production mixing phase of the one before, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, the songs are not, or the pieces, I'd rather call them pieces. They're
Yeah.
instrumental. They don't overlap each other where you're like, okay, where do I put things?
Yeah. The Yeah, sorry, lost my train of thought there. But basically, yeah, there's definite progress in my compositions as you go from one album to the next, but
Yeah.
they're so close in time that it's really sort of almost a smooth gradient from the start of integrals to the end of meditations, even.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's the piece I wrote earlier on meditations are maybe closer to what I wrote later on Amor Fati, and same like the later piece I wrote on integrals are. I'm
Nice.
trying to think like, yeah, go ahead.
It's an evolution of
Yeah,
kind of your writing ideas, writing skills, writing where
composition
you are
skills and
at
sound
that
design
moment.
skills and um, the sort of orchestration and arrangement and how many people are involved. Like we went from
Right.
just me at the start. Integrals was I played all the instruments except Marcus did one guitar solo, but everything else was all me. And now we go to meditations where I have maybe a dozen contributing musicians, and
Wow. Yeah.
I'm not I think there might be some songs that I don't even play on at this point, or maybe I
Okay.
only play synths. But there's certainly songs that I don't play touch guitar on,
Right. Did you
which
play,
is
sorry, go
fine.
ahead. Yeah.
Yeah, which is fine because I'm kind of happy to not be the main instrumentalist
Right.
and just tell the music where to go and have people who are better than me perform it. It's great.
So that's actually one of the next question I have, is that those musicians, do you give them specific parts or more of a general idea? And then if you did give them parts, I'm assuming you probably give them a fair amount of creative freedom, or does it have to be like, okay, those are the parts, kind of try to follow them?
Yeah, I'm still wrestling with that. Like it's a constant tension the between like I wrote this composition. There are certain parts that in the service of the composition they need to be performed as written. Um, you can do it expressively, but I mean all the notes kind of have to be there.
Right.
And then there's there's that aspect, which is like just play what I wrote, but you want to give them something that they can call their own.
Right.
They're contributing to a project, and you can get surprised. I mean, I don't know the best way to do everything. They know their instrument the best.
Yeah.
They should be able to use their instrument and use their experience to bring that to bear. So there's that. On the other hand, like I really want to give a lot of freedom to every musician, and but then at the same time, what makes it difficult is they're all these musicians are different. They're all individuals with their own like ways of doing things and ways of communicating, and so it's challenging to get that message across sometimes, or to make sure they feel like they have the freedom that they need, and that they can take advantage of it. So these are all things I'm still learning, but yeah, definitely there's some parts that need to be played as written, and there's some parts that where I give total artistic freedom. If it's a solo, they can do whatever they want, pretty much, as long as I like it, of course. But
yeah. So some things are actually improvised in some sense, or let's talk about Amor Fati, where you have other musicians on that album. Some things are improvised, and you tell them, okay, there's a solo here, knock yourself out, kind of thing.
A good example of the combination of the two is the tracks that Gary Husband did on the song Saber on Amor Fati. Like some of the tracks he did, he played as written, like some of the more like basic rhythmic stuff, and some we just cut him loose, and said, look, just do what you will, be Gary Husband. You don't have to play Latin piano.
Right.
You don't have to play this as a salsa. You're not a salsa musician. You're this amazing jazz fusion, and rock, and can do anything musician. So just be yourself. And that, I mean, is an amazing performance if you've listened to it on that song. And some of that I wrote, but most of what he played I did not write. I mean, it's really just him bringing himself to the song. So that's the kind of event that we want to happen,
right,
when we hire musicians.
Yeah. Yeah, and I was thinking, I mean, you have some flute and oboe, which was played by Aurelie Doro from the Houston Symphony, and her husband. Those are probably, I mean, obviously they know their instrument. They're like absolute experts in their instrument. But you probably gave them, okay, this is the line, and then of course, some things might change because you know your instrument better than me, Mark, who doesn't play flute.
And I'll say first, like that's always a concern when you're writing, and you just decide, oh, I'll just include this instrument without really knowing how it's played, but you learn to respect things like the actual range that the instrument can play. Like a flute can't play bass notes. And you can still leave it up to the musician, but they have to breathe sometime.
Right. That's another problem.
You might want to account for that. But their parts, I think, so Airly played on, I think she played on at least 2 songs. So she played on Fate, which is the first track on Amor Fati, and her part in Fate, that was all written, so that's played as written. And there were flute and piccolo parts in that. But then on Equinox, which is the last track, a little of that was written, but it's mostly her improvising. I think it's all improvised, not necessarily in one take. I'm
Okay.
sure it wasn't in one take, but she just said, just blow over this part, as they put it.
Yeah.
And that's another like amazing performance. Like it's just really gorgeous.
Yeah. And then she put the parts she liked together, and she sent you the track, I guess. Is that?
Yeah.
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 No,
And then
that's
her husband, Colin Getwood,
Mhm.
played the English horn on Refuge. And that part was all written too. But again, just beautifully done. Like
All right.
the English horn in the intro of that really still gets me. It's just, yeah, great.
Yeah. I'll have to listen back to that stuff. And it's yeah, when you're dealing with musicians that of course have that kind of experience and ease with the language, I'm going to put it that way. It's
Yeah,
it always gets incredible results, so much more than what you expect in your writing.
yeah,
So yeah, um, so you also started collaborating with Kid Arrow. I think there's two albums out. One is under Kid Arrow, and one is under Laconic, I think.
yeah, I mean, three if you count New Fire, which is related to. So, yeah, should I go into that or?
Yeah, how did that? Uh, where are the roots of that? How did that start? And what's the writing workflow like?
Yeah, yeah, so that's interesting stuff. So the roots of that are, again, back to the last year when I went to Italy to mix Amor Fati. So I met Marcus so Marcus, produced that. So I met him in Milan airport, and then we drove from there to Solferino, which is where the hotel was, and then the Ritmo et Blue, Ritmo et Blue Studios, which is in Pozzolengo, which is nearby. So anyway, it's like an hour and a half drive or something from Milan to that region.
Okay.
And I think, so it's really on the way to go mix Amor Fati. Marcus was talking about Kid Arrow, and uh, that he was thinking of starting to like sort of offer that as a service in a way. So Kid Arrow is basically the name for his project, which does certain kind of generative compositions. So he has some amazing process that he's built for taking like seed MIDI files with melody and chords and bass lines, and turning something, maybe an 8-bar piece of music into a hour-long evolving amazing track. So it's basically a big process of transforming MIDI files from a few small ones to a bunch of long ones. So he'd put out a bunch of albums already under Kid Arrow that way, and he thought he could open it up to like having people commission albums,
Right.
which Gio did, Giovanni Pagano.
Yeah. Yeah.
He's the first one to do that. I think even Gio suggested the idea of opening it up for commissions. And I thought, well, or maybe Marcus said, but there was this possibility raised where you could have as much involvement in it as you wanted to. You could just say, well, I want this kind of album, and kind of give him feedback on this kind of sounds that are used. Or you could, actually come up with the seeds and have him use those. And I thought, well, maybe we could, I could give you the seeds and you generate the MIDI files, and then I can just take those and do what I want with them. And he's like, yeah, I'll do that too. So that was in January. And then I think about halfway through the year, he opened up Kid Arrow sort of as a service. I'll put it this way. I'll put it. And I said, well, let's get started. I want to do something that I can release while, we're finishing up writing and recording for Meditations. So that's where it started. And so my idea was that I would take all these MIDI files, and Marcus Cadero would do the composition and I would do the arrangement. So I would take the MIDI files and actually assign different instruments to be played by them. And originally I thought, well, I will actually like perform some of these parts on touch guitar or on bass. But I mean, it's 45 minutes long, and it's quite complicated in some places. And soon that idea went out the window pretty fast. Although bits of it came back. I mean, bits of it are performed, just not the whole thing. So,
right. Okay.
But the idea was, all right, I need to assign sounds to that. That's a huge range of possibilities. So I need some kind of creative constraint that I can use to get started. So I had this idea. That, I have lots of hardware synthesizers. I have lots of software synthesizers. Maybe I could do stuff chronologically and start off the piece with synths from like the early 70s, or even just before synths really became used. So like pre Minimoog, pre Buchla, just Hammond organ and Rhodes and that kind of thing, and Mellotron. Although there isn't any Mellotron in the final piece, but Mellotron was an option. And so start off with early stuff, early 70s, and then just kind of move through time up, sort of using more and more modern synthesizers, and finally ending up at where we are today, which is, I'm not sure how to characterize it, but there's a lot of synthesizers now. So you have hardware synths and you have software emulations of hardware synths.
Right.
But you also just have some synths that are only in software.
Mm-hmm.
So things like Arturia Pigments and Native Instruments Contact is like a sample-based synth, and Vital's another one, Surge, things like that. So we'd end up there, and so it's a 45-minute piece. I thought it would be nice to kind of have all the sounds change every 5 minutes. So I chopped it up into like 9 pieces and did research, assigning different collections of synths and sort of in a chronological order that made sense. And that turned out great. And then as we got to as I got to the point where it was ready to be mixed, at some point I thought, it'd be nice to have. Well, I did drum machines too. So I wanted to have percussion along the way. So I thought, well, we'll do drum machines chronologically too, and that worked out. But of course, the very beginning, I mean, there were sort of synths at one point, but not really drum machines. So I thought, well, we need to have real drums. So I just had Juan Daman, a Spanish drummer who drums on all my albums, who's amazing. I had him put together some loops. So I used those at the beginning, and I thought, let's sort of circle back to that when we hit the end. So you have real drums at the beginning and end. And then sort of the last thing I did was I realized Cherry Audio had put out these emulations of these synths called what is it now? The Solovox and the something else. One's sort of monophonic, I think, and one's more polyphonic. But those are synthesizers that were invented in 1939. I thought, well, we can have the story go back farther. So I kind of took the first 5 minutes and split it into two and a half minute pieces. And so the story actually starts in 1939 with these Hammond synths, which are pretty cool and really amazing for considering what the year was.
Right. So
there's a taste of that at the beginning, and then it goes on for 45 minutes, and it evolves, and it's really that album's been really well received. Like, not a lot of sales, of course, but
right.
But people who listen to it, some of them just really love it.
And that's the one you released under your name. What's the name of it?
That's Time and Tide.
Time and Tide. Yeah.
Yeah, so on the flip side, so Marcus took the same MIDI files and did his own thing. Kid Arrow made a Kid Arrow album basically from the same MIDI. Of course, he used it in different ways, but
Right.
you can even hear when I listen to it, I can hear that it's really the same. It's the same piece of music, but of course, it sounds totally different. Like you wouldn't
Right.
necessarily catch that.
It's
And
the
there's
same
another
seeds.
album that came from the same seed MIDI files, which is New Fire. That was really another Kid Arrow album, which was released before that. So there's sort of three albums that are related. And there's New Fire, and the one that sort of goes along with Time and Tide is called Wait for No Man, of course. So
Okay.
so the two go together.
Yeah, I'll make sure that all those links are in there, so people can refer to that and hear it. I'm actually gonna have to kind of go back to it too, because I'm not sure if I've heard all of it. I know I think I've heard New Fire, but that might be it. So
Oh yeah.
yeah. So so what did you learn from that experience with working in that mode? Because it's obviously very different from very different from what you're doing with the Amor Fati and the new album coming out eventually.
I mean, I can think of two things. Well, I mean, first, going through that exercise, I learned, I think a lot about the capabilities of different synths and different software synths that like I hadn't been using. Like if you get the Arturia V collection, which I bought fairly early on, which was probably the best investment I made in musical gear. It covers. There's so many different there's really a lot in there in terms of emulations, and some kind of synths I never used. So I got some experience using those, and I picked up some more along the way. Things like the software versions of the Korg Prophecy and the Korg Wave Station, which I brought in at some point. So I learned some about the capabilities of those and some of the like Roland Cloud emulations, some of the digital synths from the 90s that Roland made. Again, I sort of hadn't touched those, so I was sort of forced to look into those. And so the whole thing, I think, kind of expanded my sonic palette, which was good. But also, I think maybe to a lesser extent, but it's worth mentioning, like there's no, in the MIDI files, there was no percussion. Nothing labeled as percussion anyway. So I had to take MIDI that wasn't really designed for percussion and turn it into percussion.
Right.
And that worked out well too. So it's sort of, there's lots of cool MIDI tricks that I've accumulated over time, and that sort of forced me to develop that muscle of being creative and how you use percussion. And I, those not only drum machines, but I use synths in some places in a percussive way.
Right. Yeah.
So it kind of, the whole thing really, built up certain skills and expanded my sonic palette in terms of like what I might consider using in the future.
Yeah, and I know you've done some percussion drum machine kind of stuff for other pieces of music, and we'll probably kind of end up on that. Is what's next for you, like the master plan kind of thing? Any collaborations in the future? Things like that. Big question.
Yeah, big question. I mean, the main thing that's really occupying my music time right now is the new album.
Of course.
Which is probably more than half recorded at this point. Maybe 3/4 even. I've got all the drum tracks, well, nearly all the drum tracks, nearly all the bass tracks. Just waiting on some keyboards and some orchestral instruments and some guitars mainly. There's some pieces. Actually, in previous albums, didn't use, I'm trying to think of the only guitar I used on Amor Fati was, I think, my brother playing rhythm guitar in some places. It's otherwise all the guitars are touch guitars, but this is the first time that I actually wrote parts specifically for guitar, including acoustic and electric and nylon string acoustic, steel string acoustic. So there's a lot of guitar parts that have to be recorded. So I'm working with at least like 3 people who can play and trying to get those parts divided up in a way that makes everyone happy and isn't too overwhelming.
Yeah.
So that's the main thing is finishing up recording of that, which I want to get all that done by the end of March so that it can be mixed and maybe released in the summer.
Okay.
So there's
Well, that's quick. Yeah.
Yeah, it is quick. Yeah, again, like you alluded to before, I had told myself I was going to slow down and take my time and sort of compose this over the course of 2 years. But again, like I finished it in pretty much 1 year. I promise I'm going to slow down on the next one and stretch it out because it's really not a sustainable pace. I need some time to recharge.
Yeah.
Besides that, I'm doing some collaborations, some more with Tim Gardner.
Hmm.
But I won't. It's not my project, so I don't get to decide how much I can talk about it. But so collaboration with Tim, collaboration with some other people, Wink.
I know, right? Yes,
And
we're working on some stuff together, but it's yeah, I kind of put a pause on it because I was finishing up on some other
you've been
stuff, but
super busy too.
hopefully,
Tim's
yeah.
been super busy too. So kind of have to
It's
get back into all that.
when the composing bug hits you, it's kind of like you don't want to stop because you never know when it's just going to leave you and you're going to be in a dry spell for a little while. So
Yeah, exactly. You gotta
yeah, for some reason
write it out.
everything has a tendency to arrive all at the same time. It's like, okay.
Yeah, you know how it is,
Yeah. So
So I'd also like to, if I have time this year, I'd like to do another collaboration with Kid Arrow. Like that was really, it's kind of, again, it's operating in a different kind of mode. So it doesn't,
yeah.
doesn't suck up all your like compositional energy. It uses a different kind of energy. So I could see doing that again. And it was a lot of fun.
Yeah, and I'm glad you went through the methodology in so much detail because I was curious on how that was working. It's quite interesting.
Yeah, it's really,
Yeah.
and I mean, if whoever watches this, if you're interested in doing that, just approach Marcus. I mean, you can get it
Yeah.
going.
Yeah, for the number of years I've known Marcus, I'm like, maybe there's a point I need to, I don't know, try to work something with him and we release something together or something. I don't know. It's yeah. So, but no, this is great. I really appreciate your time, Mark, with and all the information you provided. I'll make sure that all the links to your stuff is somewhere available and visible.
Great.
Obviously, your album right now is Amor Fati, which is already about over 6 months old, I guess, maybe over almost a year.
Yeah, maybe like 9 months. I think
Yeah,
it came
9 months.
out in April or May.
But it's always good to put it back on and listen to it. It's prog, but it's not prog, like
Yeah,
what people would think of prog. I think it's uh, in a sense not tainted with some of the prog,
tropes or
yeah, exactly. Um,
traditions that don't need to be
trad-
there or
that don't need to be
expectations.
there anymore after what 50 years now that this was in the 70s. So
Yeah,
um,
and we all live close to the edge. We don't
yeah,
need to
we
make
don't need
that.
to do it again. Yeah, or Foxtrot, or I don't know,
Yeah,
Red, or whatever it is. Absolutely. So, yeah, no, really appreciate all of your time,
yeah,
and
of course. No problem.
I can't wait to see and hear the next thing.
Yeah, it's going to be awesome. I really love what's coming.
Yeah, absolutely. Great. Well, thank you very much, and we'll post that and see what happens.
Okay.
Cool.
Thanks, Cedric.